story written by a local author, and we make it available free of charge to all residents of the greater Boston area through printed copies and online versions. We've been so lucky to have Grace and Chandreyee involved in One City, One Story over the past 2 years. This year, we're excited to feature Dumba Chora, which we have in print here today. We also have the story available in several languages on our website, bostonbookfest.org, for those watching at home. And we invite all of you to attend our virtual festival programming, including One City, One Story related sessions this October. Now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Jane De León Griffin, Associate Dean of Arts and Sciences at Bentley University and Executive Director of Inspired Masses.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you all so much for being here. It's a real pleasure to be on stage with these two amazing writers and to be here in collaboration with the Boston Public Library and the Boston Book Festival. So my name is Jane, and I will be moderating our conversation with our authors today. Before I get started, in the spirit of both the previous speakers, I do want to acknowledge the real historic solemnity of today, the 20th anniversary of the attacks on our country, and ask that we take a moment in silent reflection to remember all those who are the victims who are deceased and living from the 9/11 attacks, and also the deceased and living victims of the United States genocide on Native peoples, specifically the Massachusetts tribal nation and the Neponset people on whose sacred land we now sit. Thank you. It is my great honor to introduce our two authors that we'll be speaking with today, both of whom have participated in One City, One Story and Boston in 100 Words. Both of them have written stories that were selected to be celebrated and read across the entire Boston area as part of the Boston Book Festival's One City, One Story program, which is a great accomplishment. Chandreyee Lahiri also was an honorable mention writer from the 2020 Boston in 100 Words Flash Fiction Contest, and this year Grace Talusan was one of our esteemed judges who selected the winning stories for this year's contest. So it's great synergy to have these two participating in both contests that share, along with the library, a real belief that reading is a public good and it builds place-based community, which is what we're here to talk about today. Chandreyee Lahiri was born in Calcutta, India, and spent parts of her childhood in Africa and various parts of the Middle East before returning to India in her teens. She moved to the United States for a graduate degree in geography, which led to a 25-year career in geographic information systems for environmental management. She lives in Waltham with her husband and teenage son. As a writer, Lahiri is an active blogger. She frequently runs flash fiction writing groups. She's curated a children's magazine, participates in writing contests, obviously, and frequently engages in public storytelling. Her short story, Dumba Chora, was selected for the 2021 Boston Book Festival's One City, One Story program and has been translated into Bengali and Hindi. She aspires to continue publishing short stories as well as children's literature and narrative nonfiction about her life. Grace Talusan authored the memoir, The Body Papers, a New York Times Editor's Choice selection, the winner of nonfiction for the Massachusetts Book Awards, and the Restless Book Prize for New Immigrant Writing. Her short story, The Book of Life and Death, which we'll be discussing today, was chosen for the 2020 Boston Book Festival's One City, One Story program and was translated into several languages, including Tagalog. Recently, she's published essays in And We Came Outside and Saw the Stars Again, Writers from Around the World on the COVID-19 Pandemic, edited by Ilan Stavans, and Alone Together, Love, Grief, and Comfort in the Time of COVID-19, edited by Jennifer Hoped. She is the recipient of a U.S. Fulbright Fellowship to the Philippines and an Artist Fellowship Award from the Massachusetts Cultural Council. Currently, Talusan is the Fannie Hurst Writer in Residence at Brandeis University. She was born in the Philippines and raised in the United States. So I'd like to start today's conversation talking about how the two of you found out about One City, One Story and decided to submit a story to it. and whether your choice of which story to submit to the contest was influenced at all by the contest's mission that reading in public together builds community. So Grace, why don't you start?
Sure. So I found the pamphlet at a Dunkin' Donuts as I was like many years ago, probably the first, I think it was probably the first year that Boston Book Festival had the program. And I was coming out from, I was writing somewhere and I was going to get my coffee and I saw it and it was free. And so I was like, sure, I'll pick up a story. Like, this is awesome. I can put it in my bag, put it in my jacket and pocket. And I read it on the train that day. And that's how I found out what it was. I didn't know what the process was to be considered for submission or anything. And in some ways, you know, I kept going back to it and I would see different people publish in it. And then one of my friends was chosen, Jennifer De León. And then I thought, a few years after that, I thought, well, why don't I try to submit a story myself? And it was pretty last minute. I saw the call for submissions and I thought about what I had available. And I thought about whose stories we hadn't really heard from or seen in the series before. And that was sort of my decision-making approach, was I wanted to think about whose story wasn't there. And I mean, I never thought that it would get chosen. This is how I approach submissions in general anyways. I put my work out there and then, you know, that's the success, is putting it out for submission. And at the very least, the readers and the judges would see it. But I was really surprised that I won.
That's great. Chandreyee, how did you find out about the project?
It's kind of similar. I work in the North End, and the Boston Public Library that's on Parmenter Street is a library that I frequent. And one of those trips, and yeah, I'm going to say it was the first year that the book was out, I picked it up, I really loved it, and I would just wait all year for it to come out. So I followed it until last year. I think I had every single one of them. And in a fit of cleaning, I'm so sorry that I recycled them, but I've had them for that long. I really enjoyed it. I loved the incidental nature of it, of picking it up, not knowing what genre it would be, not knowing what would be in it, knowing it's a small, quick read, and always of such amazing quality. What made me submit, well, the story, first what made me submit is my day job is very, very different, as most writers are. And so I try to look for opportunities to write, to keep practicing my writing voice. And one of the ways that I do that is by entering contests. It's a deadline and it makes me get going. And so that was why I said, well, why not? You know, these are wonderful writers, but let me just write. I had no expectation of winning. And as for which story to write, it's somewhat similar to Grace. I looked through some of my favorite stories that I've written, and it really, the chance to share my culture and to share a story that's set in such a different area than Boston that it might as well be Mars was really appealing, to bring people into that world, especially when they least expected it, because they wouldn't know what it's about.
Yeah. Right, you wouldn't necessarily know, most readers in Boston might not know what it's about from reading the title, sure. Right. So, you know, the One City, One Story and Boston in 100 Words both really care about making short fiction free to the public and putting it in public places where people like you can serendipitously stumble upon it and read it on your way to work. And so I'm wondering what it's like to publish your work in that kind of environment where you know that the public is going to be invited to read and discuss in very intentional ways your work, and that your stories will be distributed for free. It seems different than publishing with a commercial press or a magazine or even in a newspaper, other formats and venues. So what is it like?
I mean, it's wonderful. Like, I don't think about making my work in financial terms anyways, because that would be foolhardy to do. Like, I need to have like a steady paycheck, and I don't think about of course I want to make money with my work, but I don't think of it in that way. And to be able to have, for Boston Book Festival, to have the resources to distribute it and print it and lay it out so beautifully and put it in people's hands without any money having to pass between people, I think it's a gift. And that's the way I feel about writing anyways, is that kind of approach, as like gift making or something. And I know that there are barriers to, I mean, you can go to the library. Those are some of my first experiences with reading is borrowing books from a library. But even that is a little bit of a barrier, as opposed to just like walking by and seeing a big old stack of books and or pamphlets, and you can pick one up and take it with you. I think it's very special, and it means a lot to me to have my work published this way.
Yeah, I would say very similar. It's just, it's wonderful to know that it's accessible, the accessibility and the reach. But I think one of the things that really thrills me about this, and I think I kind of said this already, that I use the library system a lot, but I'm very amused at how I pick the books. When I buy in a bookstore or in a library, it'll be my mood, it'll be what genre I want. Even in a genre, it'll be, do I want literary? Do I need to just lose myself and be Calgon, take me away? But the thing about this program is that people don't know. And I feel like when they don't know, there's less preconceived notions. If I'm reading a mystery book, I'm expecting a mystery, and I'm going to be a little bit critical. My expectations are going to be set a certain way, and there's a very good chance I'm going to be disappointed based on what I expect. I love that this is a sneak attack. I love Kim's convenience. This is a sneak attack that people don't know, and I think I'm hoping that it means that people's minds are wide open when they pick up the book. And the first page that they get into, if they thought this was a piece of Indian literature, they may not. And they might see my name and they might say, oh, what is this? But not really. If it's so accessible, it might make them pick up a book that they wouldn't ordinarily have picked up. And the Boston in 100 Words is even more sneak attacky, as in, when it's plastered on. A friend of mine actually saw my story when she was waiting for the tea, and she told me, I was looking at it idly, like you're unfocused, you're waiting for your train, and then it kind of filters into your subconsciousness. She started reading it. She was like, oh, that's Chandreyee. But even people who don't know me, to walk in different people's shoes without knowing that that's about to happen, I can't think of a better way of touching hearts and minds.
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach with Boston in 100 Words is brilliant, to put the posters, and because we're looking at advertising constantly, and our eyes are just kind of glazing onto it, and to have it be a voice from the city is incredible.
Yeah, so for those of you who are not familiar with Boston in 100 Words, it's only been in Boston for 2 years, so maybe not everyone has heard of it or seen the posters, but we do take all of the winning posters from the contest each year and produce them as very large illustrated posters and display them in public spaces for free around the city. And last year, all of our winning stories, including Chandreyee's, all the posters were distributed throughout the MBTA system, so people saw them on the T as they were going about their daily lives, similarly to how you picked up the One City, One Story book in Dunkin' Donuts. Yeah. So I have a couple questions prepared about your One City, One Story texts. So for those of you who have not read them, I hope that there aren't any spoiler alerts in here. I do encourage all of you to go read these stories. They are very surprising and enjoyable and profound in many ways. And place plays such a central role in both of your texts. So I was hoping we could talk a little bit about that. In the Dumbachora sandbank of the Thakuran River in India's Shondrumbon Delta is not only the setting of Chandreyee's story, but it is also a character in it who acts on other characters and moves the drama forward. And in the Book of Life and Death, Grace's short story, Boston, Massachusetts, is both a blessing and also a curse to the story's protagonist, Maribel. The city offers her the opportunity to provide for her family and improve her daughter's life prospects, while simultaneously preventing her from sharing her life with the ones she loves the most and subjecting her to the stereotyping gaze of American racism and classism. So what does place mean for both of you? And why was it so important for you to structure your stories around such a specific place that had such power over the characters in your texts? Maybe Chandreyee, we can start with you.
Okay, I have an interesting story about this. I have what the young people now call an origin story. For me, the place came first and my story came second. My cousin, Hoimonti, who lives in Kolkata, she and her husband love traveling. They love nature, and they're particularly interested in the Royal Bengal tiger. So they visit the Sundarban area, which is at the delta of the river Ganges, partly in India, partly in Bangladesh, and they visit there a lot. And she posted pictures on Facebook a few years ago, or 10 years ago, of this beautiful boat that was stuck on a sandbar. And they were just haunting pictures, and I wanted to know I was like, what is this? She told me, and I was like, well, now, there has to be a story there. And so the place came first. I'm very familiar with the area, mainly through this incredible novel called The Hungry Tide by a very well-respected writer that I think a lot of people know about named Amitav Ghosh, who's a prolific writer. And he said it in the Sundarbans. I got to know a lot about it. I'm in environmental management, so I've been following it. I've visited myself. It's an area that I really know. So what place means when I write, it's usually something I know so that I can expend less energy in describing it in a frilly way and really feel the feelings that it invokes, and then I can focus on my character and my plot and my layers. But this is a funny thing where what happens in my story, a lot of it actually happened. My cousin's boat actually got stuck on the sandbar. The rest of it's all made up.
Right.
But yeah.
But it's so interesting how what happens in the environment really provides an opportunity for the characters, the drama between the characters to unfold. And that all was just you kind of.
That was me with, so my cultural, everything. I think the wonderful thing about writing short fiction, and even more so with flash or microfiction, is that it's like everything that's bubbling in your mind condenses or precipitates into these few kernels. And there's backstory or subtext that would take a novel to explore, and maybe it wouldn't be so much fun.
Right.
But so when I was talking to you about the story, and I was like, I never realized how much of what I think about changing social mores, about the role of a woman in traditional society, of the push and pull between climate change for the Sundarbans and loss and deprivation, all of that got condensed into this story, which might read like this hijinks adventure, but there's a lot behind it.
Absolutely.
And the place brought it out.
Brought it all out.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. Grace.
So for me, for folks who haven't read this story, it's called The Book of Life and Death. It follows a Filipina domestic worker from Manila. She goes to Hong Kong, and then she ends up working here in Boston for a family. And for me, as an immigrant myself, I mean, I don't have the experience of being a migrant worker, but as an immigrant, I am thinking about place a lot and paying attention to place, because I left a place when I was very young. When I was 2 years old, I left Manila to come here to Boston. And even though I had no picture in my mind of what Manila was like from experience, it all was through story and through my imagination, from the stories that my parents told, their Filipino friends told. There was this longing for that place. And then there's been times when I didn't live in Boston, and when I would write about Boston, and writing was a way of recreating that place and the feeling of the place. And when I was doing some revisions for this draft, I probably wove in more of Boston than usual, because I just had been inside of my apartment for 6 months or something, and I hadn't even ventured out into the city, even though I only live in Medford. And so there's a way that I was imagining, oh, okay, the BPL is over here, and the river's over there, and there's the Commonwealth Mall. And I was just trying to put those places in my imagination, and by writing them and alluding to them in my story, I could feel like being back there again. And so that's what it meant for me as a writer, to revisit those places. And as for the reading experience, I mean, I have a similar experience. When I read, I can be transported elsewhere. So it works both ways for me as a reader and a writer. But I was also thinking about relationships as a kind of place, because in some ways it doesn't matter to me like where I'm living. I need to have like people I love around me and like friends and a community, and I really could be anywhere because the where I am or how I feel in relationship to other people is also a place for me.
That was one thing that I felt was very kind of painful about your protagonist, Maribel, is that I don't know if she has necessarily that community around her. It seems like the ones that she loves the most, her people, are all so far away. And the people that she lives with here, she has a very complicated relationship with. And the people that she interacts with through them, that they bring into the house, there's even a more complicated relationship with. And so it just felt so much empathy for her, that, the longing that she has for her daughter, the longing she has for her family, and the book of life and death that she creates because of that, right, to feel connected to them, despite the distance. It was really profound.
I think the other thing about Grace's story that really drew me in was the place was, Mirabel's the one who worked for it, right? Mm-hmm. It was like she was shifting between two different worlds just by going to work.
Right.
So there's Boston in her life, and there's this other bubble that she gets subsumed into where her identity seems to evaporate. And to me, it was if I think about your story in terms of place, it's how nothing is, there's duality everywhere, that nothing is what it might
you
seem.
see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no one America, there's no one Boston, there's no one Waltham where I'm from. And your story brought that out really well. You can be Filipino and be with other Filipinos in Boston, but don't be so sure that you're sharing the same world.
So that brings to mind another question I wanted to ask Grace about your story. So Maribel, the protagonist, she has quite a lot of intellectual training and capability that is not reflected in her social status as a domestic worker in the United States. She's not able to use her education here as she was trained. And when I was reading the story, I was thinking about how smart she seems and how I could imagine her at a Dunkin' Donuts picking up the one city, one story, and because she actually lives in Boston, that would be something that could really happen to her. And I started thinking about actual Filipina domestic workers who live in Boston, who are not characters in a story, but exist here amongst us and are our neighbors. And what if they had read your story? And do you know if they have, and how your story has been received by the local Filipino community?
I mean, because we were under such unusual circumstances during the pandemic, I wasn't able to connect as much with folks. So I actually asked my mother right before I got here, like, what have you heard from folks? Because I know, like, my friends I have a book club, Filipino American book club that I'm in, and so that's a particular group of folks who are there from all backgrounds, but who love to read, and so we had conversations in that circle, but in terms of other circles, I just didn't have access. But my mother, who knows a lot of people in our community, said that she hadn't heard any complaints or anything like that. So I think people who were able to get access to the story appreciated it. I looked at some reader emails that I got from last year, and I'd heard from students who the story was assigned in their class, and I heard from some Filipino American students, and they said that. They said, thank you for validating my experience, because for them, even though they don't also have experience as domestic workers, they just never see themselves in literature or in a classroom ever. If we appear in a classroom, it's probably going to be something that we might feel mortified about or sad about, or maybe it has to do with the drug war or some sort of human rights abuses or whatever. But this was just a chance to read a piece of literature that wasn't necessarily tied to a big political event. I mean, it's tied to globalization, of course, but not, some other kind of thing.
That's wonderful.
But it was thank you. That was the message I got.
It must be so rewarding to hear something like that.
Yeah, it is. And every time I get a note or a message or something from a reader, it's I respect it a lot and honor it. I mean, I know what it's like for me to read something and take a step of reaching out to somebody. So, yeah, it's amazing. And I hope you hear from folks too.
I'm sure you will. So something else I noticed about both of your short stories was that one could argue that there are feminist characters and feminist themes that run through them. Maybe, maybe not. But in Dumachora, Shotope, who is the protagonist, female protagonist, unapologetically tells her husband that she was not a virgin at the time of their semi-arranged marriage. And to her surprise, he seems respectful and accepting of her choices. He was not overly upset by what she had told him. In the book of Life and Death, Maribel is painfully aware of the way in which her boss, Jing, exploits her and takes her for granted. Yet at the same time, we see moments where the two women show genuine caring for each other and share something that we might call a female solidarity relationship. So I'm just wondering if you read your texts as feminists, if maybe I was overreading a little bit, or how you see these themes, and if you do see your text as feminists or feminist text, how you feel about that in terms of your work as a writer. Maybe Chandreyee, if you want to start.
Sure. If I had to go back and look over the favorite short stories I've written, I find that a lot of the women do engage in some sort of a struggle for agency in their lives. Feminism is not usually my first, the strongest thing informing me. And in this particular story, I would say Shutapa is, there's definitely feminism. There's a strong vein of feminism in her, in what she does and what she says. But I think what was informing me more was how Bengali culture, the culture of West Bengal, where I'm from and where the story is set, how that's changing, how the social mores are changing there. The traditional arranged marriage that most people in America know about, where, oh, men and women marry each other sight unseen. That's changing. And one of the big things that's changing along with it is a woman's right to have a say. So in this particular story, when Shutapa actually takes this person head on to say, you have a problem with me having a past, but it's okay when you have a past, it's really, it's in a kernel, it's how society's changed. Mm-hmm. That there's still, it's never a complete change because our culture is what it is. You know, there is, casual sex is still not, in big cities it is changed a lot, but at least in the time that I placed this story, it wasn't so casual. When you have conservative families, it's not so typical for you to go out and just marry whoever the heck you want with your parents not giving you their blessings or not having a say in it. But one of the biggest things that's changed is that you don't get yanked around before. And traditionally, when my parents got married, the woman had less of a say than the man. And so definitely in that sense, I think my primary, what was informing me was to hold up a mirror to how society's changing, but definitely one of the strongest things that's changing is how women have a voice. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, yes.
And Shutapa has a very strong voice, and she really, the way that she stands up to her husband actually puts him in physical peril.
I love that.
Which is a great twist in the story. So,
depending on how mad I was at my husband, it could have ended very badly. That did.
You must have not been too mad at your husband. It ends okay. I have one more story for you, Chandreyee, about your or more questions, sorry, about your story. Mm-hmm. And that is that there's the two protagonists that we have been discussing are the recently married couple. Mm-hmm. But their boatman, Raymond, is an important secondary character. And the specter of his deceased wife, Shoinda? Roshida, yes. Sorry. She's important too, and the two of them seem almost at times like a double for the main protagonists in their marriage. And so I was just wondering, what caused you to think of them and place them in the story, and why did you think that their role was important?
I have to tell you, it's so rewarding to me that you picked up on this, and I'm so glad you're asking me this question. Yeah, I think I subconsciously totally, it was a story in parallel. They were the mirror for Shutapa and Shekhar, who in the story are newly married, 3 months old, and there's a lot of distance between them, and their boatman lost his wife to a tiger attack when he was young. And I think what I was trying to show is the distance that was between Shutapa and Shekhar at the very beginning of their life. To me, it seemed like loss. And really the thing that made me think about that more than what was happening with those two characters is how with digital distraction, with just everyone but getting caught up with how busy life is these days, we can be in relationships and still be lost to each other. We're not present. There's a lot of talk about this. I'm not the first person to mention it, but I think what I was thinking is, oh my gosh, it's so sad that Shutapa and Shekhar at the beginning of their relationship, they're lost to each other because of these preconceived notions they have about these conclusions that they've jumped to. Oh, you don't like me because I have a past. Oh, she's still in love with her old boyfriend. They're not even trying. They don't even know to reach out, and they might as well have been lost to each other. And right next to them is Rahman, who didn't even get a chance to figure out how to have a married life because she was really lost. And the one thing that I feel surfaces a lot in everything I write is the idea of loneliness and the idea that you don't have to be alone to be lonely. And so Rahman to me is, you can be lonely because you really don't have anyone around. And Sheet by Jal is a couple where they're both lonely and they don't have to be. And there's a chasm between them, and if only they could find a way to bridge it. Rahman doesn't have any options, they do. So I think that it wasn't intentionally, like I said, it all bubbles up, but that's definitely something I think about a lot.
It seemed, though, in a sense, that Rahman has some kind of positive satisfaction in some of the actions that he takes, and feels that the way in which he acts towards this married couple while they're stranded on this boat honors his deceased wife and connects him to her in a way that was stolen from him because she passed away and she was murdered by a tiger, and that he finds a way to connect to her vis-a-vis how he interacts with them.
I definitely meant that. Sometimes resolution for things that really bother you come in the strangest ways and in ways that are not directly linked. I mean, helping this couple heal isn't going to bring back his wife or erase his loneliness, but this happens in life too, right? You feel really bad about one thing. It's also my outlook on the world is I frequently find myself in utter despair about inequalities and tragedies, and I always feel like I can't address that one, but if I do a strike for good somewhere else, maybe it helps me feel better, and it helps me regain equilibrium. So I guess I just passed that right on to him.
So I wanted to switch now to, you've both mentioned aspects of your personal lives and your stories as individuals, and being immigrants is something that you're both very proud of. Chandreyee, you're very active in a lot of storytelling slams, and I think that you've even started some groups for South Asian women storytellers. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, Grace's book, The Body Papers, won the Restless Book Prize for New Immigrant Writing. So it seems so appropriate that One City, One Story is celebrating immigrant writers because, of course, not only is our country a country of immigrants, but Boston is also a city of immigrants. And I was just hoping that you could comment a little bit more about what it means to you to be an immigrant writer in this city and have your story be shared so widely, and just I guess the role between your identities as immigrants and your identities as writers. So Grace, maybe you can start.
Sure. I mean, my experience as an immigrant, as I said, I came here when I was 2. There's ways that every day I was like crossing a border at my parents' house, and then I wrote this in my book a little bit, or in more depth, about this sensation of going from my parents' house, we were a Filipino family, and then stepping out into the world where it's a different cultural context. And I very much tried to be like everyone else, be like my friends who were largely, I grew up in a homogeneous town, it was predominantly white. And so there's ways that I wanted to be white myself and to fit in there. And I had to understand, like, no, will never be white, actually. And there's ways that I need to come to terms with my identity and what it means to not be white in our society, and to, instead of trying to hide who I obviously am, like phenotypically I am not white, to try to investigate it, be curious about it, find the ways to talk about it, and in my case, write about what it means for me as a particular person to be an immigrant. And of course, I'm not representing anybody but myself. And I hope that we get like lots of more stories and other immigrants and other people who we haven't seen in books and in culture, to have them write their stories, because that way, like, I'm not one of the only voices out there. But I think it's huge to have this book or this pamphlet be published, because we are here. Immigrants have been here doing all sorts of work, and there's just ways that we're not perceived as being American or part of this American project or economy. And there's ways that, frankly, I know that there's ways I've tried to disappear, because, we're remembering, 9/11, 2001 today, but there's ways that, like, right after that, some communities, didn't want to be targeted. There was ways that they were in peril after that, and being perceived as being blamed and stuff. So, there's these ways that we try to be visible, and then there's ways like we try not to be visible, and this is a very visible way of putting one story out there about one character from a Filipino community, and I think it's a great opportunity to tell more stories.
If I can ask a follow-up, what was it like for you having left the Philippines at such a young age and living the majority of your life in the United States to go back to the Philippines as a Fulbright scholar and live there?
It was great. It was like, I'd do it again in a minute. It was a wonderful, wonderful time, some of which is because I had time and resources to write. I could be a full-time writer for that whole time. I've never been able to do that in my life. I usually am like juggling lots of different jobs. And so this, the purpose was for me to go and write, so that was front and center. And also to be there in the Philippines and live there, and in a way to be an American there. I was treated so well, and I realized I was American, I guess. Like, I always felt very Filipino, and I lived there for 6 months, and I said, I don't know anything. I don't know a thing about being Filipino. I know a little bit, but I don't really know as much as I think. And living there, from the language to cultural practices to shortcuts or shorthand people had with each other, I was just realized I'm American. So that's what was some of it, but it was amazing. Food was great. People were so warm and welcoming to me and my husband, and I would go back in a minute.
What a great opportunity. Chandreyee.
That was great, and I'm going to change what I thought I was going to say about this, and I'm going to be really honest. I feel like as an immigrant here, I code switch a lot, because there are times where if I achieve anything or if I reach and touch anyone, I do some public storytelling, and I'm always very conscious of the fact that I don't want to play my race card, I don't want to play my immigrant card. Yet in spite of everything, I think a lot of the stories I end up telling, a lot of the fiction that I write, something about my immigrant experience leaks through. And I feel very resentful of having to be so conscious or self-censoring of this. And that is part of, like what you were saying, is sometimes you want to disappear. I want my work, I want people to like the story I'm telling or the story that I'm writing because they like the content, not because I'm an immigrant and they feel like they need to be, there is a sense of satisfaction from thinking, I've read an immigrant story, and I don't want that kind of tokenism. So it is being an immigrant and even getting wonderful recognition or the chance to reach people like this is very confusing to me. I hope people don't like the story just because it's an immigrant story. And I'm absolutely thrilled that my Boston in 100 story had nothing to do with, in fact, the blind submissions, people didn't even know my name. So it wasn't tokenism.
And I don't remember anything in the story that
No.
has any immigrant themes at
There
all.
wa-
Yeah,
not at
nothing.
all, not at all. And a lot of my story doesn't, but I know when I was at one of your panels for Restless Books, I asked this question is, what is immigrant writing to Elon Stubbins? And I asked for this is a wonderful prize. Grace's book is amazing, and all the writers who have won that award are amazing. And I really found myself wondering, what is this label? What do we expect when we say it's a piece of immigrant writing? Does it have to be about another culture?
Right.
Does it have to be a story of oppression? Does it have to be a story about conquering, climbing mountains and beating Goliaths? And I said, can it just be that the way I approach a true story when my son was little and he had American friends over, if they didn't finish their plate of food, they would just slide it into the trash can, and that's not how it works in my culture. So all his little friends, he's got 2 little friends who have grown up as part of our family, and they knew very early on that you don't do that in this house. So if I write a story about that, it can be completely American, but it's informed by me and my immigrant perspective. So it matters a lot to me. I made the conscious choice to enter a story into this contest that was, it can't get more immigrant-y than this. It's set in my home culture. It's about changing mores. But it was, if I really thought that I had a very high chance of winning, I didn't think I had a chance of winning. If I did, I'm not so sure I would have picked this story. I'm thrilled to bits that I did. I am so grateful that so many people are going to get to know about my culture. But I told you I'd be very honest. It's double-edged.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. I had one final question about kind of your thoughts on One City, One Story and Boston in 100 Words, but I feel like you've already talked a lot about that. So if there's anything else you want to share, that would be great, but we could also just go to questions from the audience.
I mean, I think that it further cements Boston's identity and commitment to literary culture. We're really lucky, I think, to be in this city and to have things like the Boston Book Festival, One City, One Story, Boston in 100 Words. I mean, it's a commitment to this literary culture, and I think that draws writers here. My writing community is here, and I've been to other cities, and I think Boston is special in what we have here for a literary culture.
I'd like to add that I think both of these programs are amazing strikes in favor of community building, in the sense of, I'd said this before, there's no one America, there's no one Boston, but we all live in our little bubbles and our echo chambers. We don't know what's really out there. And I think it's only when you read a piece of fiction or nonfiction, I'm part of the storytelling community where we tell true stories. It's only when you walk a mile in someone else's shoe that you really get to know what lies outside your bubble, because realistically, when are we ever going to meet people who are very unlike us? Life doesn't work that way. You get drawn to people who are like you. Literature is the way of doing that, and storytelling, which I strongly, strongly believe in, is a way to do that. And I think both of these programs, like I said, incidentally draw people into the lives of others, and they may not realize they've been changed by it, but I'm hoping people who read my story or people who read about the Filipino domestic worker have a slightly better understanding of what it means to be that. Maybe they'll judge a little less. Maybe they'll just know more about life. And I think both these programs are amazing for what they do.
Well, thank you both for participating in them
Thank
and
you
giving
so
us your
much.
talent. So those conclude my questions, and I would love to know if there are any questions from folks in the audience or online.
We don't have any from online,
Okay.
but we've been encouraging them, so
Yeah.
if you want to just reiterate that would be great, so the folks online can hear you.
Yeah, sure. So anyone watching online, if you have a question, please pop it in the chat, and Kristen will be kind enough to relay it back to us up on the stage. Does anyone here in the audience want to ask a question to one of our authors? One second. We've got one down here, and then we'll get up there. Yeah. Go ahead, Kristen.
Thanks for this program. This is amazing. I guess I wanted to know, do any of your family members ever serve as like your first readers, or do they read drafts of your work, in particular maybe these stories? Thanks.
No, I've learned my lesson. I mean, there was a time when I would write something, and of course I'd be in my apartment, and who was in my apartment but my husband, and I would immediately be like, oh, please, can I read this to you? And I learned that's too much. It's too much pressure on my family. So I mean, they're probably the last people who see my work actually, and it's probably better that way. 'Cause it's like getting the relationship gets a little bit messy, in my opinion.
Do they read it eventually?
Oh yeah, well, I hope so. I mean, sometimes I have to ask and say did you read it?
Yeah.
I don't know. We actually don't talk about my work ever. So yeah.
That makes me feel a lot better. It's about the same.
Yeah.
I have a few friends who indulge me and who will say, hey, do you have anything new to read? And I might show them. But yeah, I felt like I'm too invested. If they don't respond very enthusiastically, I'll be crushed, and I don't want that to happen. But a few times I have had, before submitting to a contest or something, I have had my husband read to help me kind of check, not for do you like it or not, to check. And with my storytelling, my little son has been invaluable. So for storytelling, I'll often run it by him and say, did it land? But yeah, otherwise, great.
So we had a question right here in the middle.
Do either of you have any new stories or books in the works, or are you thinking of any?
Yeah. So I mean, I probably won't say much more about the new projects I'm working on, except that I've been writing and working on them every day and getting my word count up, and it's fiction, and I hope that I do something with it. But what's making me happy about it is I'm writing every day with a friend, and that's been a total game changer for me. We write together, we read aloud what we wrote to each other in the moment, and that's changed everything. But thanks for asking.
Essays, short fiction, long
a
fiction?
novel.
A novel.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Oh, wow, that's exciting.
Yeah.
I'm not published yet, except
You sure
these
are.
yes, ephemeral, but published, right? I would love to. I've submitted to, like I was saying, I create opportunities to write by submitting, and thanks to 2 contests I've submitted to, both of which I lost, I now have put together an anthology of short stories and a rough draft of kind of memoir or more maybe narrative nonfiction, and I really hope that I could find an agent or a publisher who's interested in helping me shape it up and maybe make it ready to be published. I would love that.
It certainly seems that the One City, One Story could be an opportunity for you to gain access to people
I
like
hope
that.
so. I don't know if there's any formal channels, but I certainly hope someone will like it and ask me if I have anything more. I have a lot more.
Yeah.
I've run flash fiction groups, so I have a vast trove of I have 50 stories that I like, that I think might be worth reading, but we'll see. Thank you, I hope so.
Yeah, we have a question from online.
We have 2 from online.
Great.
They are related. First, Fiona asks, with all of your experiences in the lives that you lead, how do you choose which stories to tell and to write? What is the decision process like for you? And she adds, thank you both very much for being here. And then Judith asks, can you describe your writing practice? So those are very related questions.
Should I repeat the questions so that, did people online have heard them because they read them in the chat, so we don't need to repeat them. Okay, perfect. So either of you want to?
Yeah.
You go first.
Okay, so thank you, Fiona and Judith. So one of the questions was about what do I choose to write, and that does go into my writing practice. So when I'm so now my writing practice is writing every morning from 7 to 8:30 with a friend on Zoom together, and I'm trying to be really open to whatever appears and to follow wherever there's life or energy or something interesting. and there's no editing at this point. I mean, there's editing enough that I read it out loud, but there's no like, oh, I can't say this or I can't write about that, because I'm not publishing, I'm just reading it to my friend. I have to make different decisions if I'm going to submit it for publication. I do think about a lot of things. For example, like my one city story about the domestic worker, I ended up doing a lot of research. I knew I wanted to write about the life of someone who had to leave her family and keep her family in her mind as she did her work, which was very invisible and not thanked and not given the kind of stage that like I'm sitting on here today. So I wanted to think about a character who had that kind of life, and that's not my life. So I did a lot of research. I went to Hong Kong. I hung out at the parks where people would take their Sunday break, Filipino domestic workers and Indonesian domestic workers. Hundreds, maybe thousands of folks are taking their break on Sunday. So I did that kind of research and talked to people after I wrote this story, because I wanted to do a good job and not make assumptions and be misperceive things as much as possible. And I do try to think about the impact of my stories. I'm aware that there's not many stories about Filipinos or books or depictions in films and other things. And I know that it shouldn't have such an impact. I'm just one person, but I know that it does. So I think about that. Maybe I think too much about it, but I do think about a potential impact that some of my work can have. And I want to be careful, and I want to be mindful of the power that stories have and that words have in our culture, and to respect it. But at the same time, I want to tell stories that are alive and tell the stories that I think are important. Whoever participates in an artistic practice, a writing practice, I say let yourself like be as free as possible and do it. Like that to me is the most motivating part, is like, it is kind of like the best part of my day, at least lately, has been making stuff. And that feeling that I'd made something, and then I can move on and do the rest of the things in my day pretty happily. But publishing is a different thing.
Thank you.
That is so inspiring. I want to do that now.
Oh,
Yeah.
fun.
I think for me, so again, thank you for those questions. That was a thoughtful one, both of them. I think I like how you said where there's life and energy. I think that's what it is to me. It's whatever is trending in my mind. And sometimes I don't know what it is until I've written it. But what I realize is I can't write without a prompt, because I don't sit down. I don't have that writing practice yet, which I should do. But if it's storytelling, usually the storytelling show will have a theme. If it's fiction, it's usually a flash fiction prompt that I've thrown out in my group, or that I'm responding to something. And I find them really, really wonderful, because the way I work with both kinds of prompts is that I just empty my head and I write stream of consciousness. And of course, if it's storytelling, then it's real life. And if it's fiction, then I have immense license to place it wherever, make my character, explore characters who are not me, but imbued with some of my characteristics. And what I find is whatever comes out, it's when I read it later on that I realize what was going on in my mind. And again, like I was saying, because it's short fiction, I'd like to think that some of them are interesting and have subtext, but in my mind, I know what was going on that made me pick that particular theme. With the Shutapashekar story here, for instance, it was the idea of not being present with the busyness of life and with digital distraction, that you're there, but you're not there. The setting was because of the push and pull and environmental change. So that's kind of how I feel like I don't have a choice over what I write. What I write tends to be what's bubbling inside my mind. It's not conscious. It's not an intentional thing.
Well, one thing I think I'm hearing both of you do in terms of your creative process is kind of, I know that, Chandreyee, you do timed writing, and you do something similar with your friend every morning, maybe for a longer period of time, because I think you set it for like 20 minutes?
20 to 30 minutes.
20 to 30 minutes. So that seems to be something that you have in common in terms of your practice of setting a very finite amount of time. And I know for me, as a writer of very different genres, academic writing, setting that time can really liberate you from the dauntingness that writing can be, right? Of like, oh my God, this is so hard. How am I going to get anything out? But if you give yourself that limit of, I only have to do it until the clock ticks, then
Yeah,
then
that's
it can
exactly
help.
why in my flash fiction groups I do that, is when I have said, oh, I really think I have an idea here, and when I try and express it, there's so much self-doubt, there's so much self-censoring
Right.
that I seldom get beyond a few paragraphs. And any arc I have to the story, to the character, never gets there. Whereas when you're pressed for time, it comes out in a way that's wonderful, and now you can go elaborate and cut. So yeah, you're right, I find
There
that
was a question right here.
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to ask that, I know that obviously you're amazing writers, and I know that you also are incredible storytellers. You've done spoken storytelling. And I wondered, because they're two very different mediums, how one may or may not help you with the other. How do they fit together? Has one kind of enhanced your ability to communicate in a certain way or not? Yeah, I'd love to ask you that question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I started doing storytelling. I think a friend asked, and it was, I think I just read like Shonda Rhimes' Year of Yes book, so I just said yes. And even though it was like really terrifying for me, actually, I write for a reason. Like I don't feel comfortable speaking off the cuff or even performing storytelling. So, but I did it, and I think that, I wrote it down first, and then, but I realized that there is actually a leap. There's a huge difference between writing and reading from a text that I wrote and standing up and performing. It feels completely different. But it's very instructive because your audience is there. I responded to them like in the moment. I can feel I might make a split-second different choice about what to say based on that audience response. And so if people are interested in doing it, I think like they should like to challenge themselves and try to do it, because it's incredibly dynamic and it's also like a really neat experience. Like even if it doesn't go well, I think it's an incredibly great experience to have, even just to tell yourself, like, I did it. Like, I stood up in front of people with no notes, and I talked to them. But they feel related, but very different to me. What about you?
It's very similar. And actually, so storytelling, for those who may not know, is storytelling in the tradition of The Moth, which is a popular show that people have heard. We have stories from the stage in this area. It's true stories told from your life. And I feel like storytelling and fiction writing, to me, both inform the other. I think practicing writing fiction has made me a better storyteller, and doing more storytelling has made me a better fiction writer. The one thing in common, or many things are in common between the two, but one is the idea of arc, and my definition of arc is just not just the traditional having a beginning, middle, and end, but having something develop, having an idea or a relationship or a character develop from when my piece starts to when it ends. That's one thing that's common in both of them. The other thing that storytelling, I think, helps me with fiction writing is in storytelling, you have to dig deep down inside and find one true moment or one true thought. Often it's more than one, but you have to have one central throbbing, pulsing idea that then drives you, that makes you say, I need to tell this story. And that is something a little bit in common with fiction writing too, that its own, I don't know, I'm not a trained writer, but I imagine that you touch people and you reach people only when you yourself believe in it. That when it feels real to you, you write what you know, or you write what you feel. Even if that feeling is vicarious, if you really feel it, if you can feel it throbbing and pulsing, only then will it shine through in your fiction. And it's just the same in storytelling. So I would say both have helped. They have so much in common. And I think I especially during COVID, there's been so much virtual storytelling that I am immensely grateful for how it's made me plumb my past to figure out things about myself that I never would have. I would have thought it's self-indulgent or something to think about, oh, what a life I've had. What a life have I had? I haven't exactly cured cancer, but storytelling is amazing that way. It makes you plumb those depths and it makes you think about things which you never would have. And fiction writing helps you take that a step, lets you imagine what if, which is also liberating and gives you insights sometimes, I guess. That's a great question. Thank you.
So I think we're coming up on the hour. If there's maybe one more burning question, we can have it. I don't know, Kristen, if there's nothing else online. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. This was a really fun afternoon, and I appreciate everyone being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you so much to our authors.
Thank you. This was great. This was great.
And of course, to the Boston Public Library for hosting and the Boston Book Festival for the partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I'm so used to